Hello. Um, Today I just want to go over a couple of things that have helped me figure out how to paint over 3D. If you're anything like me, then you might have struggled with this for a while. I know that me and other people who are maybe more into the traditional side of art and concept art and painting kind of find it difficult to blend the two seamlessly, but I figured out a couple of tricks. I thought I'd share them. So, I mean, the first thing here is I'm just putting this gun on a black background because I want to present it nicely, like a kind of broken out element. And here's an alternate render view that I just applied the black background to, but I think I prefer this one just because for the purposes of a breakout it's a lot more clear what's going on. It's a lot better lit. I think it's lit with a HDRI. I've started here with a fairly kind of polished model that I just took into Substance Painter, but I'm by no means the world's best 3D modeler. You know, it was my first time using Substance Painter, and the rest of the gun was modeled in 3D Code. It's quite simple. So not too hard to get to this level of model, and even if you can't, I'm sure these tricks would apply to maybe something simpler. So all I've done for a start is I've shifted the values down so that the whites aren't so white, and then I've painted in some specular highlights myself, because if there's one thing that gives away a 3D render, the first bit is really bright whites, because when you're painting you kind of reserve those whites for little tiny bits that you want to draw the attention to. So I thought I'd just try and create that effect. The next thing that I figured out, and I'll probably bring it up on screen, is I've been looking a lot at Devin Corwin's work, and he manages to get this look in his paintings that's kind of like pastel-y, and that's what I'm doing here with the diffuse filter. It took me a while to find out how, because I was just trying a load of different things that I thought it might be, but if you use the diffuse filter, that it kind of gives all the edges a more rough look. And again, this is something that will give away your piece as being just a 3D render, is the fact that all of the edges are super perfect and crisp. So we want to kind of mess them up as early as we can. So if you just do this filter and then Control-Alt-F will repeat the filter a couple of times. I'm not sure if it's too obvious. You want to kind of keep it subtle. The how big the effect is depends on how big the canvas is. So you need to size up or down your canvas depending on whether or not it's affecting it too much. Now the problem with that is it makes this like pixel perfect mess. So what I like to do now is I like to just scale it down a tiny bit, and scale it back up to its original size. And I figured out that makes like the anti-aliasing take effect and kind of blurs that pixely mess a little bit so that it isn't so obviously crisp in a filter. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pattern stamp that is like brush strokes. I got this one from Greg Ratowski, but I'm sure you can find a pattern of some like a canvas texture or brush texture on Google somewhere. In fact, I might try and find one and maybe link it in the description or something. We'll see. But I just want to scale it up so those brush strokes are roughly the right size that I want them. And it apparently takes 5 years because I made it too big. So I'm pretty sure I cancel this and just try again a bit smaller. Yeah. And this part also took me a little bit of experimenting to figure out. But once I have this absolute mess, I want to duplicate it first so that I can have two of them, and you'll see why. So this has all my nice brushy texture in. Just trying to get it to the right scale. And ideally I want to set it to lighten, and you'll see why in a sec. So when it's on lighten, if I just duplicate it first, you can go to the levels adjustment layer and you can bring up all of the darks pretty high, so only the very brightest lights show through. This will only work if it's on a lightened layer mode. And that kind of gives the impression of like glossy black paint, because it's only reflecting the very highest points on the paint if it was like thickly laid down onto the canvas. But once again, like as with anything, you really want to keep this quite subtle because it's super overpowering. If you do it too much, it's going to look horrific. And then the other one that we got, we're just going to kind of do the opposite with. So we want this to show up in the lighter areas, not the darker areas. So I think I just put it to soft light, and then I levels adjust it in the opposite direction, just to give it a bit of grain. I turn that down to about 20%. I'm going to be subtle with it. And that's going to sit on top now for the rest of this painting. And that's that. So we had step 1, the diffuse filter and scale. Step 2 is the lovely paint textures, which is kind of an obvious thing if you're thinking about trying to make something look painterly. And step 3 is really where it comes into its own. This is what I've figured out that will make it look a lot more painty and a lot less 3D rendery. So the issue with a 3D render is, and I'm sure you could fix this by doing some kind of Blender wizardry, is that usually your renders don't have much hue variation in. They're very sanitary and stale when it comes to color. It's difficult to get interesting colors into a render. But this filter is the replace color filter. And as you can see, you can just select an area, and depending on the fuzziness at the top, the area will be a different sample size, and then you can just replace it with a color. Now, something that I figured out a while ago is that if we look at the color wheel, it's 360 degrees of color, or of hue. And if you split 360 degrees in two, what you get is 180 degrees. So half a circle is 180 degrees. Everyone knows that. So if you have on a hue slider instead of a wheel a color, and you just shift it to the very end in either direction, it will go 180 from the starting point. And if you know anything about color wheels and that kind of thing, that means you instantly get the complementary color of whatever color you had selected, which is quite powerful because you can set this up kind of automatically. So if I just select this random color here, and as you can see, right up to 180, you instantly get the complementary color of everything around it. And what you can do then is you can just kind of make it a lot more subtle, and it will pepper these little pixels of complementary color all around, and it looks very pleasant. And that's the kind of thing that you're maybe not going to get in a 3D render straight away. Now, that's not to say you have to go for the complementary color. You can explore with other colors. So here I want to put like a vibrant pink into the front of the gun, just for no particular reason. Just thinking it might look interesting or nice, or it's quite a bright color that you might not expect to see from a 3D render anyway. Now I'm selecting the red. Once again, I'm just going to zoom it over to the very end, 180, and we're going to get these bright blues. And then I'm going to shift it back a bit to the green, because I thought we want a few of every colours in this. The more kind of hue jitters and special little colours we get in there, the more interesting it's going to look. It's one of those things, though, where I think it could be very easily abused if you're not responsible with it. Obviously, if you select an area and put an 100% saturation, ridiculous color in, like if I put a bright lime green in the center of that gun for no reason, it just wouldn't work. It would look ridiculous, and it might even be plainly obvious that I've used a filter, whereas at the moment you kind of get away with it as being almost hand painted, which I'm quite pleased with. So you can sit here on a separate layer. Typically I like to duplicate the layer as I go in case I want to go back after I've made a couple of changes, but I was feeling fairly confident with these, so I didn't feel the need to. You can play with brightness as well to get some interesting stuff going on. I think because this is a metal weapon, I probably have a bit more free license to play with color, because color tends to show up quite vibrantly in reflective objects. But we're just getting some more variation in. You can do this as long as you want, so Here I've done it maybe 10 times, but feasibly you could sit with a piece, especially if it was a larger scene than just one prop. Maybe if it was an environment scene, you could sit there and you could select colors and you could mess about and just inject lots and lots of colory goodness in. I'll attach work up on the screen now of an artist I'm thinking of, and I'll have to attach the name because I've forgotten. But as far as I'm aware, they use this kind of thing very well when they're painting. They don't use this method particularly, I don't think, but it achieves the same effect. And if anything, I think this is a lot easier for you to think about, especially if you're maybe more technically minded. It might be more pleasant to use a slider and do this manually than to insert these colors organically as you paint. But once we have enough, which I think I do have enough now, I'm going to duplicate the layer, and this is where I can just start painting. So I'm just going to grab a mixer brush. If you don't know what the mixer brush is, it's kind of like the clone stamp brush. It can like sample an area that's already on the screen and move it about or put it down somewhere else. And this means I can just sample areas and maybe mix them about slightly and mess them up a bit, roughen them up, because again, I want to get rid of this kind of clean render look. And I'm probably going to speed this up right here. You'll see me just go about and destroy a lot of the lovely work I've done. And this can be a kind of tricky part of the process, because I'm sure a lot of the time when people are going to go through this bit, they're probably going to destroy a lot of the lovely colors that they put underneath and destroy a lot of the detail from the model. And it's tricky to get the balance between messing it up to the point where it looks painterly and actually just making it look worse. So at some point there, I actually went back and just erased into the layer. That's the benefit of working on multiple layers, is obviously if I don't like a change I've just done, I can go back and fix it, which is lovely. At this point, I just thought that this handle was meant to say licked because it's a flare gun. That's German for light. So it was kind of disappearing on me because I was using the mixer brush and I was using that diffuse thing to make it all wibbly. So I was trying to bring it back a little and make it just more clear. So the next thing I'm doing here is I'm just putting in some individual brush strokes. The problem with the mixer brush is that it's maybe too vague and soft. It can make these very blurry, blendy marks that don't stand out on their own. So I was just thinking about going around areas that maybe needed some more texture or definition, like the leather wrap and those copper wires, and just adding individual brush strokes so that if someone zoomed into this, which I don't expect they will, but if they did, they'd see these actual brush marks, which would give, even though they're in little select areas, they might give the impression that the entire thing was painted because it's like slightly more obvious. And here I am just putting some more in again on those kind of specular, more metal areas where I think they should be. The next step from here would be to put the logo on, but I couldn't find it, so we'll do without that for now. The next part, as far as I'm aware, is I'm gonna select the original gun and I'm gonna copy merge it all so it's on one big layer on the top, and then I can adjust the values as one image. So to copy merge, you want to select everything and then it's Shift Control C in Photoshop, and it'll just paste a merged version of everything together. And what I want to do is I want to bring these blacks up. It's very rare when you're painting that you get 100% black, whereas in a 3D render it's quite easy to get 100% black. So changing that was a priority. I then messed with the values a bit more and I kind of turned back to 100% black, but it really pumped up the vibrancy and all of this, all of the metally kind of stuff, which I quite liked. I quite liked the contrast. It made it maybe more graphic But as you can see here, I'm removing it on the background again because I'm not a fan of how dark that gets. I think it looks way too computer generated. I much prefer keeping my blacks around maybe 4-5%, going anywhere up to 10%, because having it grey, that reads as dried black paint to me. If you paint black on a canvas, and assuming it's not that special Vanta black mega paint, it's going to dry lighter than perfect black, and it's going to have light reflect off it and all this kind of stuff. So if we're trying to make it look traditional and painterly, which we are, kind of want that to come through. Now, the final thing I do with this is something my lecturer told me about. Big shout out to Anthony Martin. He told me that you could put hue jitter, and I actually put saturation jitter as well, on a brush and set the layer mode to lighten. And then if you can kind of zoom around, I think I turn this jitter up even more than that. If you go around and you sample areas and then you immediately paint over them with this hue jitter, you get all these kind of funky colors going on. I actually pushed this further. I experimented with some things on my own. So Anthony, if you're watching this, you can try out this new thing I've figured out using your technique, which is that if you do this, you can get all these nice colors, but they're quite subtle. And if anyone knows me, I like to go bold. I like to be quite in your face with my paintings. So after I've finished messing about with hue jitters and maybe brightening some areas up, you should see that I go into a hue and saturation panel, and you can actually whack the saturation all the way up to the max pretty much, and you get these insanely vibrant colors. Insanely vibrant. Just on this layer with the hue shifts like this. And then because it's a lighten layer, all you have to do now is lower the brightness, and you'll still retain those saturated colors, but they'll be so subtle and they'll blend in. You can see there that it just warms up all of that metal. That metal's kind of vibrating with that warmth now, which is absolutely wonderful. And I really do have to thank Anthony for this one. But yeah, we've gone from a kind of stale render to that. So I'm quite happy, and I hope you can see how this might be useful, especially for someone who isn't as pleased with the very 3D look. If you want it to look more painterly, my advice to you is to just experiment like I have. Look at artists that you're inspired by, even if their work is purely 2D, and just see if you can figure out ways, whether that's abusing Photoshop filters or putting overlays on, messing with levels. Levels tends to be a big thing. Contrast in 3D renders and paintings is very, very different, and value structures. I think when you're painting, you have a lot more control over your value structures, and when you kind of make a 3D render, a lot of that control is gone unless you're paying a lot of attention to what you're rendering. So bringing that control back in Photoshop and clamping down some of your values can help a lot, make it look a bit more painted. I hope you found this useful. I've really been enjoying doing this recently. I wasn't too confident with it previously, but the more you experiment, the more you learn, and the better you become. So if you find this as useful as I have, please leave a like and subscribe. But that's that. I'll see you in the next one. Right, bye bye.